lovelies, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Maria, and in today's video I'm going to go through all of my recommendations for the best fantasy standalones. So there's some fantasy that has a bit of romance in there, some that I would say is a little bit more leaning towards dark academia, and some that are just a bit more pure fantasy where there is a little bit of romance but it's not the main plot. So yeah, just a lot of different fantasy genres within there, and I know that fantasy can sometimes be a little bit daunting because it tends to be series, you know, at least a trilogy usually, if not, 5 to 10 books, and that can be a little bit daunting if you're not wanting to, commit to such a big series. So yeah, I thought I'd put this list together of some of the standalones that I've thought have been really good over the past few years, ones that I've enjoyed, and especially if you're kind of getting into the fantasy or the romantasy genre, it's good to kind of dip your toes in with one of these standalones just to see if it's something that you will like. So there are no particular order at all, just 10 of the fantasy standalones that I think are good entry points for the genre. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the list. So the first few that I'll go through are a couple of books that are from the same authors. So the first one would be V.E. Schwab. Now V.E. Schwab has quite a few different series and different fantasy worlds that she's built, but there are a couple of standalones that I think are really good entry points into this fantasy genre. I would say with fantasy, if it's not a genre that you're used to, it might be worth checking out some of the young adult novels that there are out there, especially the standalones. And just because it's young adult, generally it doesn't mean that, the themes are going to be childish or anything like that. Sometimes they can be, but I found that quite a few YAs have really worked for me. So a lot of the time with YA, especially in romantasy, it just means there's no spice or maybe no bad language or anything like that. So it doesn't always mean that it's going to be a childlike theme. And one of the books that I picked up from V.E. Schwab was Gallant, and this one is certainly in the YA section, and I would say it does lean to the probably younger YA. Plot isn't too convoluted, it's not too complicated to understand. This one's maybe a bit more like magical realism / fantasy, so it is really dipping your toes into that genre. This one we follow our main protagonist, Olivia. Now Olivia can't speak, but basically her parents died when she was very young. She isn't able to speak. She was kind of in care for quite some time, but then an uncle that she didn't know about when she is 16 invites her to come and stay at his house at Gallant, and things start happening there. She can see ghosts and things like that, and the story kind of goes from there. I don't want to give too much away because it does kind of spoil some of it if you know too much going into it. It's a book that is quite good to go in a little bit blind, but this one, if you like kind of haunted houses, gothic feelings, and a bit of a darker atmosphere, I think this one will be for you. It's quite a short read as well, so it's not one that's going to have too much commitment. I think there's maybe around 300 pages or something like that. Yeah, just over 300 pages. So this one's definitely not a big commitment if you're wanting to dip your toes into the fantasy genre. And you can kind of see the vibes from the cover as well. It's an absolutely beautiful cover. There is a special edition I wish I had, which had sprayed edges, but yeah, the end papers again give you kind of the vibes that you're going to get from this one. So it's kind of a spooky gothic type of theme that you'll get in there, but it's not too convoluted because it is that YA, that younger YA section as well. And yeah, I just thought it was a really quick, easy read. Gives you some really good atmosphere, leans on the magical realism side. So if you're really entry into the fantasy genre, I definitely give this one a go. The next one by V.E. Schwab is one that's kind of on a different, I would say it's probably closer to the romantasy genre. Now, it's not kind of the main plot of this, as this one has some different themes that we'll go into, but it probably leans more towards that romantasy side, but it is also kind of a magical realism. So again, it's not too difficult of a world to understand. It is set in our world, but there's magical elements within there. So yeah, the next one is one that you probably have heard of because it is quite a viral one, is The Invisible Life of Addie the Roo. And this one is I believe it's the Illumicrate one, and it has kind of the sparkly sprayed edges. I do have another edition of it as well, but in this one we follow Addie, and basically at the start of the book it's set in around, I think it's the 1800s when it starts out, and she basically meets the devil. She makes a deal with him to become immortal, but the caveat is that when she meets someone, basically they won't remember her. So she could walk into a shop, speak with someone, have a conversation, leave, and go in 2 minutes later, and they won't remember her. They won't remember who she is. So this means obviously that her family forgets who she is, the people she loves forgets who she is, and it kind of goes through some themes of no one remembers you. Who are you? What is life? What is the meaning of life if you don't have anyone around you? loneliness and mental health, and there's quite a lot of themes in here. But then one day she meets Henry and he remembers her, and there's kind of a story that takes off from there, and it's kind of her living her life through that, the deal with the devil, how that kind of transpires. But this just was a really almost like an introspective book. There was a lot of themes in here that kind of made you think outside of what the main plot of the story was. It was a really impactful book for me. It was quite a sad book actually. I don't get moved to tears quite often with books, but with this one it definitely did get me very, very close. I remember sitting in the hairdresser's reading this one thinking it was a big mistake to do so. But yeah, this one is definitely more in that romanticy side. There is a little bit of romance in here. I'd say it's a subplot in this one, but I think because of the setting in this being in our world and the plot not being too convoluted, again, it's just a really good entry point if you're looking to dip your toes into the fantasy genre. So yeah, Gallant and The Invisible Life of Addie are definitely two that I would recommend as entry points. So the next author I'm going to highlight is one that I discovered at the very tail end of 2022, and basically in 2023 I made it my mission to read everything that she had written because I really just fell in love with her writing style, her storytelling. And what's great about this one is the stories are different in each one, but before I get too far into it, I'll let you know who it is. So it's Olivia Blake, and basically one of the first ones that I will be recommending for her is One for My Enemy. So this one is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, or a reimagining, I would say. It's basically based around these two families in New York, both families of witches. They've kind of had a battle over the years. I think there's quite a lot of Russian kind of folklore put in here as well. But yeah, this one, as I say, was a Romeo and Juliet reimagining. It's kind of written as if it's a play. It's kind of like written in scenes and acts as well, which I really, really loved. There is quite a lot of Shakespeare influence in here as well, but it didn't take away from the story at all. There's quite a lot of quotes in here as well, but I'd say this one is a really good one for anyone that likes a more classical, maybe some of those traditional writers, you know, like Shakespeare. If you've read any of that and you're wanting to dip your toes into something a bit more contemporary, this one would definitely be one I'd recommend. Again, it is more magical realism. It's set in our world. There's not a huge amount of magic in there to understand. The world's not too convoluted or anything, so it's definitely one that I would recommend for if you like a bit more romance. There's quite a lot of angst in this one as well. There is kind of an enemies to lovers aspect as well, but it's more for me forbidden love because it's between the children of these feuding families. But yeah, this one was a really good one for me. I remember just reading it, and again, just her writing style is amazing. I think in each book she does have slightly different writing styles, but each time I'm impacted by them so much. So definitely recommend this one from her if you're more into the kind of romantasy genre and if that's the genre you're looking to get into. The next one I recommend from Olivia Blake is Masters of Death. This one is a little bit different. There is multi-POV in here, and I would say that it's a bit more of a contemporary writing style than you get with One for My Enemy. This one we follow our main protagonist, Viola, who is a real estate agent in New York, and she is essentially trying to sell this mansion as the person who owned it has recently died. There's only one problem, that the ghost of the person who lived there is still in the house and refuses to leave. Viola enlists the help of Fox Damara, who is a medium, but he's actually a con man. So from there's a lot of mayhem that kind of goes on. It's basically a lot of found family elements in there as well. So yeah, the tagline for this one is a ghost infested mansion, a small group of supernatural beings, and an unlikely quest. So when Viola kind of enlists Fox's help, we do end up getting a whole host of characters. So we've got what they call unruly poltergeist, a demonic personal trainer, a sharp-voiced angel, love-stricken reaper, and they all kind of come together on this one quest. And again, I can't really tell you what the quest is without spoiling it, but with this one I just found that it was really comical. I found myself laughing out loud at a lot of points in this one. There's a lot of found family aspects in this one as well, and we do get that love story subplot in here. So if you're craving a little bit of romance, this would be the one to pick up. If you love fairy tales, the next one might be for you. So it's Natal and Boom by T. Kingfisher. I don't have a physical copy, but I will put the cover on the screen. But this one follows our main protagonist, Mara. Basically, her sister is sent off to another kingdom to marry a prince. She finds out that the prince is abusive, so she goes on a quest to try and save her sister. Along the way, she meets an unlikely cast of characters. So the first one is a grave witch who says that she will help her if she completes 3 tasks. And then she kind of meets an ex-knight. She meets a fairy godmother. There's a dog there that's kind of made of bones. So yeah, it's just a really fun one, this one. It's a little bit more eclectic, I would say. But again, it was just a really funny story to go through. And if you liked fairy tales, you'll probably like this one, because I would describe it as a bit of a dark fairy tale. We kind of just follow Mara on her quest, and there's a very small subplot of romance in this one as well. I won't say who between, but basically it does kind of follow that along. And it's a really short read, a really fun read. Definitely recommend this one if you like anything that's a little bit more in that whimsical kind of fairy tale side, but with a bit of a dark edge. And on that strain, if you do love fairy tales, another one which I think gives kind of fairy tale vibes is An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. Again, I don't have a physical copy, so I will put the cover on the screen. But this one we follow our main protagonist Isabel, and she is a painter in the human realm. And basically to make ends meet, she sells her paintings to the fae. The fae don't have the powers to paint or to craft or to do anything like that. So human craft is something that they covet, and they will come to her to buy paintings from her. So one day a fae king Rook comes to her and asks for his portrait to be painted. But she does make the mistake of painting emotion in his eyes, and that's a grave mistake for her. Because he's so angered, he whisks her off to the Fae realm. But when they get there, the realm is kind of under siege. They're attacked from every side and they need to depend on each other for survival. The story kind of goes from there. And this one I would say definitely gives you fairy tale vibes. It's kind of an introduction to, if you've never read anything about the Fae. I know a lot of people say to jump into ACOTAR, but as that is, you know, a 5-book series, if you're wanting to get a bit of an idea of a Fae story, kind of a Fae love story as well, this one does kind of tend to lean more towards the traditional depiction of the Fae. So yes, beautiful, but also a little bit wicked, and maybe the beautiful face is a glamour, you know, so it does give you kind of more of that traditional Fae folklore, which I really enjoyed about it. I would say that this one is, again, a quick, easy read. It's one that if you've never read about Fae before, you probably will enjoy. And yeah, I just really recommend it if you like anything like fairy tales and you want to dip your toes into the Fae genre, definitely give this one a try. So sticking to those whimsical vibes, I would say another one that I really enjoyed, and I think would be maybe not an introduction to fantasy. I'd say this one might be more if you're into magical realism and a bit of books that feel like a bit of a fever dream, and you're happy to read a book that maybe you have questions at the end of it, not everything is resolved. Yeah, that's kind of a caution I would give with this one, but it's The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. So I read this actually earlier this year. I'd heard nothing but great things about it, but I do know that some people maybe don't like the style of this because, as I say, you will have questions at the end of this one. But this one we basically follow our main protagonist Zachary. He is studying in university and he goes to the library one day to pick up a book, and he's reading through a book and he suddenly comes across a story that is about him when he was 10 years old. So in a quest to find out who wrote this story, he goes after the society that donated the books, and there's a lot of things that are revealed as he does that, and the story kind of goes from there. Again, it's a really immersive writing style. It does take you on a journey with it. It's a book about books, you know, there's a lot of stories kind of interwoven in here between Zachary's point of view. You do get the stories from the book that he's read from. At the start, you do feel a little bit confused. You're not really sure how this is connecting to Zachary's narrative. But as the story goes on, you do kind of see where those connections are. Yeah, this one just had me really immersed in it. The writing style, first off, was absolutely beautiful. I really, really enjoyed the writing style. It's a lot more whimsical, a lot more leads to questions upon questions when you finished it. And it is kind of open to interpretation then how the book ends. So that's one caveat I would give about this one, is it's not kind of tied up in a neat bow at the end. But if you love really immersive writing, really whimsical writing, and books about books, I would definitely give this one a go. This next one, it's maybe a bit out of season as we are coming into summer, but this one is a great winter read. So Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. So this one, it kind of follows a few different perspectives, but mainly the perspective is of Miriam, who is a young girl in the town, and her father is basically a debt collector, but he's too kind-hearted to get debts off people who are maybe starving. You know, the town that they live in does have a lot of hardship and a lot of people are struggling, but there's a lot of people kind of taking advantage of his kind heart. So because of that, Miriam takes on his role, goes and gets the debt from the people of the town, and because of that, a rumour starts that she can spin silver into gold, and this attracts the attention of the Fae King, who comes to her and, you know, basically gives her some silver that she needs to turn into gold, and if she doesn't do it, she will be whisked away to be his bride. We also follow another protagonist, Irina, and basically her father is promising her to the Tsar of the kingdom, but the Tsar does have kind of a really cruel secret that he's hiding from the world, and again, it just means that she's very hesitant to get into this union. And we do have a third protagonist, who is Wanda, who isn't mentioned kind of in the main synopsis, but Wanda kind of lives with her father and her brothers. She ends up getting involved with Miriam and her family, and basically a lot of the themes around this one are 3 very strong women who are fighting against kind of evil. And it's basically set around Eastern European folklore. It's a made-up city, but they're fighting against evil within this town. So domestic violence, domestic abuse, abuse of power and things like that. And I just find this a really enchanting tale. As I say, it's very good for the winter months. It's very atmospheric for that, and it does kind of have that reminiscent kind of folklore or fairy tale vibe as well. So again, if you really loved fairy tales growing up and you want to kind of read something that's reminiscent of that, this one would be a great pick for that. So the last two I'm going to mention are kind of leaning more towards the dark academia side, and yeah, again, they're not kind of set in fantasy worlds or anything. They definitely enter into this fantasy genre. So the first one is Babel or Babble by R.F. Kuang. Now this one centers around our main character, who is Robin Swift. He was orphaned in Canton when he was very young, and basically this English professor took him from Canton back to England, and basically the only stipulation he had for giving him board and food and kind of taking care of him in his life was that he studied and got to Oxford. So that's kind of been his life ambition. He studied really hard, managed to get himself into Oxford, and essentially what happens from there is he meets a few people within the same course who maybe had similar beginnings. So they were orphaned and maybe were brought over by their families or brought over by, you know, other people who adopted them. And essentially this one centers a lot around language, the power of language, the power of translation, colonialism and things like that. So there's a lot of themes in here of what does language mean and how detrimental it can be when things are translated from their native language to another language, specifically, you know, from a native language to English, and how sometimes the meaning can be changed and the meaning can be adapted. And that's all kind of mixed into a magical realism of a certain tool that they have here, which basically runs the world and runs England, especially at this time. This tool is kind of built upon language. It was a really thought-provoking read for me. I think coming from this one, it's one that I think about often, even about how we take things for granted in terms of if there's been a translated text, we take the meaning of that text for granted, but was that really the meaning behind it? Was that really the intent? And I think it just delves into topics that are slightly uncomfortable, probably for most people to talk about. It's something that a lot of people kind of, you know, if you're not knowledgeable about some of these things, like I wasn't myself, and I would still say that there's a lot I probably need to learn, but it was one of those books that after it, I wasn't just thinking about the plot, I was thinking about kind of the themes within there and just different things about the world and how the world works and how we work today, and kind of some of those, as I say, the preconditioned ideas that we have just in the world that we live in. So yeah, I would say even over and above kind of if you're looking to get into fantasy, this one's just a really good read if you're interested in that type of thing, kind of history of colonialism and language. And there is a little bit of, when you're reading it, there are like footnotes and things like that. I found this one was best enjoyed with an audiobook, so I would definitely recommend kind of reading it along with the audio because it takes you less out of the story. Reading it in that way, that's just my personal preference. When there is footnotes, it can take me out of the story a little bit. So with this one, if you're going to tackle it, I would maybe suggest doing the audiobook because I felt like the flow was much better doing it that way. The last one we're going to talk about is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. This one starts off with a married couple, so a newly married couple, and basically the bride gets a note to say that her aunt is dying and she needs to go back to her childhood home. So the bridegroom, as he's called, is absolutely obsessed with her and agrees to go with her to her childhood home. And basically as he goes there, the house is called the House of Dreams. There's a few weird kind of gothic goings on and secrets from her childhood, especially with regards to a childhood friend that she had, start to come to light. And with this one, I think it just kind of goes through themes of obsession, friendship and things like that. And I do think that this is one of those ones where you kind of question, did that really happen? Is this someone's memory? Is this a warped kind of vision? And again, you don't really get those answers of whether there was actually magic, if there was other kind of entities or kingdoms or anything like that. You are just kind of left to determine that and interpret it for yourself. And I'd say this one, again, it's quite a short read, this one. So this is the Fairy Loot edition. It's quite a short read. I'd say if you like thrillers or kind of contemporary crime novels, this one might be for you because I do think it kind of gave that aspect of almost like a whodunit / where is this going to go and what's the plot. So yeah, if you're kind of usually a thriller reader and you want to kind of dip your toes into a bit of fantasy or a bit of magical realism, this would be a really good one because I do think it kind of gives you that same feeling when you're reading it. But again, I just thought the writing in this one was absolutely beautiful. I really loved the way the story kind of unfolded and it did keep me guessing. Some of it I did guess quite early on, but it didn't take any of the enjoyment away from it for me. So yeah, but highly recommend this one. And that's all of the standalones that I have to recommend. I think there's a few that I've read before that they weren't my favourite, so I haven't put them in this video, but I would love if you do have any recommendations for some standalone fantasy. They can be kind of fantasy romance or just fantasy as well. I'm really always on the lookout for new recommendations, especially for standalones, because I'm always in the middle of about 5 series at a time, so sometimes it's good if you do want to read something a little bit different. You don't have to start, you know, a brand new series. But yeah, other than that, if you did like this video, I would love it if you would give it a like, and if you do want to see more from me, please do subscribe. It would mean a lot to me if you do. Other than that, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!